Medical disclaimer. This podcast is intended for educational purposes only and does not serve as medical advice. Kate and John are not medical professionals. This podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or prevent any illness. Always consult your physician before making lifestyle changes. Welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. This is episode 2 of The Illuminated Path.
Thank you for tuning in.
Please remember to like, share, subscribe. This really helps support the channel.
And if you're listening on one of the podcast platforms, if you could leave a review, that would really help us to grow and reach more people.
Friendly reminder, this podcast is brought to you by New Moon Holistic Life and sponsored by New Moon Apparel. New Moon Apparel is our Zen, motivation, and moon-themed clothing line. It's the easiest way to support us and help our channel grow. If you're watching on YouTube, Kate and I are wearing New Moon Apparel clothing. She's wearing the Moonchild design, and I'm wearing the Move with Purpose design. Show
Love
the
it.
cameras. Yeah. So how's the week?
The week is going good. Really excited that we launched our first episode. In other news, this week I drafted my fantasy football team. That was fun. I have been in my brother's league for many years now. And I drafted Daniel Jones, which is the quarterback for the Giants, and I'm a Giants fan, so that was exciting.
I'm a Chiefs fan.
John and I are very opposite when it comes to football. It's kind of funny. What else? I mowed the lawn. I actually really enjoy mowing the lawn. We went for a walk on the trail, which we love, and we got our mic flags for our podcast mics.
Yep.
They're beautiful.
They are.
How about you?
Yeah, I think I'm just really grateful for our freedom this week.
Yeah.
Like being able to go walk on the trail and just take the dogs for a walk in the middle of the day, that sort of thing it feels good.
Yeah.
Struggling with exercise, but so the story here is about a year ago, right?
Almost a full year, actually.
About a year ago, I had COVID and my lung collapsed. And I was exercising, and so it was a whole thing, and it ended up collapsing another 2 times. And I'm definitely still working through trauma around exercise and getting back on track. But I think that's kind of a good point. Knowing all this stuff about holistic living doesn't make you just live perfectly. Like, it's about knowing what to strive for.
Yeah, and I think that's also just a very real thing that you're dealing with. There is some fear there, and that's okay. But knowing all that we know, like, you're aware of that.
Yeah, right.
And so you know that you can and will, overcome that fully. I mean, you've been back to the gym, you've been working out, you've been doing great. But you have to just get back on that consistent basis and where you really feel good about it and can really overcome that little bit of fear that's still coming up for you, but
Yeah.
It's understandable. And at the end of the day, you are human.
Yeah, I mean, not being able to breathe is a pretty legitimate fear.
Yeah, and especially when it happened while you were doing that. So yeah, I can definitely not understand because it hasn't happened to me, but I can understand where you're coming from for sure.
Right. Okay, so that's a good kind of segue. Last time we talked about awareness and starting to become aware. What does that actually mean? Because we talked about, becoming aware of your stress and how typically when you're triggering your fight or flight response, there's a fear behind that. And you can typically trace back that stress to some sort of thought of fear.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me about that. What does this awareness actually mean or look like?
I think there's really a lot of aspects of our life to become aware of because our subconscious mind runs like 95% of our thoughts in our day-to-day and our actions because it really wants us to run on autopilot. And so becoming aware of the thoughts that we have and where those thoughts lead us, becoming aware of the stress that is in our life and that we feel on a day-to-day basis. I mean, so many of us are living in chronic stress. And the awareness of the reactions that we have. just based on what's going on and how we react. What is like our immediate, just you snap your fingers and this is how I feel, this is how I think, this is what happens in that moment. Also, the awareness of the habits that we have and how it takes a lot of work and effort to change those because some of those have been ingrained in us for years and longer for some others. And really just awareness of how you're living your life and what is maybe something that you could change to live better, to feel better, to create a better life for yourself.
And I think too, a level of it is being present, right? Because like we're on autopilot, so the awareness component is being able to take a step back and be present and kind of look at things and take inventory.
I think presence is a huge piece of it.
Yeah.
A lot of us are not living in the present, especially when we are chronically stressed and anxious. A lot of that is you're looking too far in the future and you're not being present because
Right.
you're just worried about, what happens next, what is in the future.
Yeah.
And so I think that's definitely a big piece of that. And that's really goes back to taking a pause and whether that's learning meditation and really diving into a meditation practice or just like the practice of mindfulness and taking a breath to bring you back to the present.
Mm. There's a phenomenon that I think we should mention. And honestly, we could do a whole episode on this, but tying in with really gratitude is there's a concept called savoring, which is
Mm,
just when you have a moment that you're enjoying, the human mind has a tendency to think, how can I enhance this? How can I make this even better? But what happens is in the process of doing that, it slips away. Like the moment passes. And savoring is really about being so present that you're just absorbing that moment
yeah.
and just hanging on to it and really kind of taking note with your senses. Like, what do I smell? What do I hear? What do I feel? Because later when you have the memory, that's what you get to hold on to. So I think savoring is we could do a whole episode on that, but that's definitely something to keep in mind is when you have those moments that you're really just enjoying, just sit in it and take inventory on what your senses are experiencing.
Yeah. I love that.
So, talk to me then about this thought model. So, you have to kind of illustrate awareness, you have this thought model where you learned it from your coach, you've taught it to your clients. You and I have done professional seminars and workshops on it,
Mhm.
and it always gets a really great response. So, it's called CTFAR. And why don't we go one at a time? So, what does the C stand for?
So, yeah, just real quick, it's what I call a thought model, and it really is a big piece of learning awareness. So, C stands for circumstance. A circumstance is really just what is happening in your life at that moment before kind of the rest of this plays out. So, circumstances I am at this location, I am doing this activity, these people are present. It is just like the straight facts without any other perceptions or thoughts coming in from others. And I've talked about it in a way of like it would hold up in a court of law as like this is factual.
Right.
Nobody can argue it and say, no, that's not what was happening.
So there's no real like room for opinion. It's just here are the cold hard facts of the situation.
Right. Yeah, it's not meant to be the opinion part for sure.
Okay. And then thought.
So T is thought.
Sorry.
It's okay. So T is thought. And what happens is there's a circumstance and you have a thought about that circumstance. I think this is something bad. I think this is something good. Um, there's so many thoughts that we can have. And this is really an important place to pause and understand, like, because you're going to have many thoughts running in your mind about the circumstance. And all of those thoughts are going to come from a place of your programming, from your past, from your learned beliefs. And so that's really what starts to automatically create the thoughts that you have that are in your subconscious mind. And so we have the thought about the circumstance, and then comes the next, which is F for feeling. And we mentioned on our first episode that your thoughts create your feelings. So this typically happens very fast.
I was going to say, so like generally people are going through this model and they don't know it.
Right.
Like this is where the awareness comes in, because you can be a very reactive person. And typically when that happens, you're not taking the pause to have awareness. So
Right.
going through this model, you can use this to start to become aware and act and behave differently.
Yeah, absolutely. So whatever thoughts we're having, that's what's happening in your mind. And that then creates the feeling, like the feeling in your body. And a lot of times, again, like that's just such a quick thing that we don't think about it. And the point of me teaching this model is for us to be able to like look back at something that we've been through and start to go through these letters. So first, sorry, let me finish. So after F, feeling is A for action. So basically you take an action based on the thought and feeling that you've had. And then the last one is just R for result. What is the result of the action that you took? And so when you really look at this model and break it down, you can see how something in your life might have played out, a situation, and you can see what was the starting point, what was the circumstance, and then what thought and feeling did you have from it, and what action did you take, and then what was the result of that. And then the activity that we've done and what I do with my clients and everything is now go back and look at that same circumstance, and what if your thought was something different?
Right.
How does that change the whole outcome of it? I would love to share an example. I've used this one a lot because I think a lot of people can relate to it. So a circumstance is, say, your husband is running late getting home from work and he doesn't call to tell you. So you have the thought.
Well, wait, back up. So circumstance, what can be argued in a court of law? The fact is the husband's late.
Correct.
And he did not call.
Communicate.
Didn't communicate. Okay. So the thought
then could be, how could he not think of me?
Right.
I'm preparing dinner for us, or I needed help with the kids, or something of that nature. So these thoughts are ruminating in your mind, and you start having feelings, the F feeling of being mad, being upset, and the action, right, when he does get home, is starting an argument.
Right.
And not even giving it a moment to allow him to explain or allow him to apologize, and having like the thought of, we are human. Like, maybe I can give him a moment to apologize or explain. He made a mistake. It doesn't have to be a big deal, but the action is a fight. And then the result is you guys aren't talking for the rest of the evening.
Yeah. And I think too, connecting the action with the feeling, with the thought. So you're going to have feelings that validate or justify whatever thought you had. They're going to go together. Because once you get to the point of feeling, it's already kind of too late, because your action is going to be based on that feeling. You have to catch it a step earlier.
You have to catch it at the thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so how could that be different? So like the way we've gone through the exercises, that's what happened, the CTFAR. But could it have gone differently? Yeah, it absolutely could have. The same circumstance, because that part doesn't change.
Right.
He's late coming home from work, didn't call, didn't communicate. The thought could be just curiosity. What's going on? Why didn't he communicate?
Is everything okay?
Is everything okay?
Yeah.
So then the feeling from that isn't so negative.
Right.
And the point isn't always to go from like negative to just super positive.
Right.
It's really to just go to a point of neutrality and curiosity and openness and staying present in what's happening.
Yeah.
And so if that's the thought and the feeling is, maybe there's a little bit of worry. Maybe there's just feelings of, curiosity, feelings of maybe impatience because you're not sure what's going on. And so the action when he gets home isn't just immediately like jumping down his throat and yelling at him for it. It's, hey, is everything okay? What's going on? You didn't tell me.
Opening the communication.
Right. And so the result is a conversation, and maybe he just truly forgot, or it was a crazy busy day and all he wanted was to just get home as quickly as possible, and just it slipped his mind. And when he arrived, it's like, oh my gosh, I forgot. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
And the result is just, okay, we had a conversation. You reminded him to please remember to communicate, and then you have a good night.
Right. Right.
And so,
or a neutral night.
Neutral night.
Yeah.
So all of that, like when you really break it down in those ways, you can see how the result can be totally different for the exact same circumstance.
Right.
Simply based on your thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
And what happened from that.
All starting with your thought. No, you're good. I was trying to jump in. Yeah, no, I think, it really speaks to starting to conduct your mind and be intentional with your thoughts, because nobody listening to this, right? You're not going to sit there every single time something happens to you and go CTFAR. It's a reference point and a point of understanding. But I think also we need to keep in mind, right? Negative thoughts are pretty natural. Like you could, your spouse maybe doesn't communicate with you, and you could very easily jump to feeling unworthy, or not worth their time, and whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's also the component of intentionality.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a lot about, the perceptions that you're having versus the perception that the other person in the situation might be having. And like about what you were saying is you're not gonna, go through and I'm gonna have a CTFAR moment while I'm in the middle of something. But
Right.
a really good practice is to try this. Like actually get a piece of paper.
Like do the exercise.
Do it as an exercise. Yeah. Write down something that happened that you can think of in this way and kind of go back to the thought, because that's where the presence is.
Mm.
And that's, again, where the awareness is.
Yeah.
You're going to have a ton of thoughts. You're going to go to, it's human nature to go towards negative thoughts and feelings.
Right.
And so, again, it's having all of those thoughts and recognizing that you're in charge of choosing which thought to believe, which thought to resonate with, and which thought to really move forward with in the way that you feel and take action.
Yeah. And if you're tuning in, this is the mental component of holistic living. It's not just meditating and calling it a day. It's really conducting your mind in a way that supports your goals.
Yeah, and it's a practice.
Absolutely. It's not something that happens overnight. It's a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
So we have the CTFAR model, and I think that this ties in with the mind-body connection, right? And your thoughts creating your feelings, but also programming and beliefs. And so I think we kind of speak to that, right? Like we have a default mode of thinking. People who are very reactive, they've been programmed to receive certain messages and certain signals as triggers, and they behave a certain way based on what they've been exposed to.
Right.
So can you kind of speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, our beliefs, like our belief system is really created when we're very young. Ages 0 through 7 is when our mind is most susceptible. It's like a sponge. It's taking in all input from everywhere. You're taking in everything from your parents, your friends, society, your teachers, the people around you, your schoolmates and everything, what you're seeing on TV, what you're seeing on the news. I mean, you may not think like a little 5-year-old is paying attention, but they are. They're hearing things, they're learning things, they're watching the reactions of those around them and taking in all of this information, and it's creating their beliefs, like their core beliefs about life.
Yeah.
And all of those beliefs then are the starting point for the way that they think moving forward.
Yeah. And, it always makes me think about, um, don't quote me on this. I believe it was Dr. Joe Dispenza. He found that gene expression is 90% our environment and who we're around, and very little of our actual genes. So, like people who are, overweight or they're uh, heavy drinkers and they blame it on their genes. It's not really your genes, it's the programming you received that your family had this issue.
Mhm.
And I think I always kind of go back to the quote of, if you have 5 friends who are idiots, you'll be the sixth.
Yep.
If you have 5 friends who are millionaires, you'll be the sixth.
Right.
And I think there's something there in terms of first questioning your programming, right? That you grew up with. I know I'm on a little tangent right now, but there's inherent programming that you received growing up. And our responsibility as adults growing up is to start to question that. Does that programming serve me? Do the people around me and the environments I'm in serve me and my goals?
Yeah, and some people are, you know, sometimes, like, really strong-minded about, like, "These are my beliefs."
Yeah.
But did you actually choose those beliefs, or were they given to you?
Hmm.
Most of the time, they were given to you from someone, somewhere, and you never question them because you're young when those beliefs start forming, and so you live your whole life that way.
Mm.
And, I mean, our prefrontal cortex is still developing well into our 20s.
Yeah.
And so that's really that frontal piece of our brain that allows us to reason, make decisions, problem solve. And so this whole time you're developing based on this belief system that you've created. And that is becoming your truth. That is becoming your life. But
Yeah.
everyone out there has different belief systems. And
Yeah.
that's based on how they were brought up and what was given to them.
Yeah. And there's a post I see floating around sometimes, and it says, your trauma is not necessarily your fault or your responsibility, but it is your responsibility to heal and grow from it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an important perspective in a lot of aspects of life, especially when it comes to our programming and what we believe. And I mean, not to turn this into politics, but I feel like politics is an area where people tend to just take on whatever their parents have given them,
Yeah, absolutely.
you know?
They're holding on to those strong beliefs, and maybe they never actually sat down with themselves and really considered all sides, all aspects, in politics or not, and said to themselves, like, who I am now and who I want to be, is that a person who believes that?
Right.
Is that a person who, like, are those the thoughts that I want to have? And I think it is scary. There is fear that can come up with changing your beliefs and questioning your beliefs because that's your identity.
Yeah. I was going to say too, I think, it's just being on autopilot. That was the discussion we had last time is I think there's a fear of like pausing because there are a lot of thoughts that come rushing in. And if you're not someone who's being intentional and conducting your mind and really being mindful of that, I mean, that can be overwhelming. That can cause anxiety. That can be a very personal moment that I think people run from.
Yeah. And I think that there's also a lot of fear around changing your beliefs into something different, especially if it's something that's going to really differ you from your friends, your family, and you're going to be an outlier now.
Yeah. Yeah. I always think of weight. A lot of people who are overweight, it's not necessarily that they don't eat right or exercise. I mean, they generally have an understanding of what they need to do. But what they're often struggling with is identity. Who would I be if I lost the weight?
Mhm.
I mean, that, personally too, I've been through that, being so much heavier to where I'm at now, where there's still, places I want to go and improvements I want to make, but like I don't associate anymore with that identity of someone who was very heavy and drank a lot and was going through those things.
Mhm.
So I think considering your identity when you're making changes, when you're questioning your beliefs, when you're being aware of your thoughts. Those are really important components to this.
Yeah. And that's just, again, it's really understanding where all of that came from. And so starting to become aware and be present and saying, like, wait, maybe I don't believe in that anymore. Maybe that doesn't actually serve me and my greater purpose in life. And maybe there are some people that won't be happy with me changing my mind on that, but you are allowed to change your mind.
Yeah. It's part of being an adult.
Yeah. And so it's being an adult, you do have to take the time to look at all of this and become aware of what beliefs you were given and like take the power back and make your own choices about what you believe in, the way you want to think, the way you want to act, because it is all things that you have to be intentional about. And again, when you're in those circumstances and you have all of these thoughts rushing in, you have to be aware of where those thoughts are coming from and really pick and choose. Like, okay, yeah, I remember that from my past. I remember why I'm having these thoughts, but that doesn't serve me now. That doesn't help me in this moment. And that doesn't make me into the person that I want to be. So, how can I change that?
Right. I think that really that's a good connection to kind of where we're going to go next, is the connection between your mind and your body. So, personally, right, when I was really heavy, I had these really negative thoughts. And as a result, I felt really bad and I had really negative actions and things that weren't healthy for me that I was doing
Hmm.
versus realizing I wanted to heal and being intentional with positive thinking. That is hard as hell. But choosing that, you start to reap the reward of feeling better and choosing more positive habits and actions. So, this really gets into the mind body connection, right? Which I think a lot of people think is not real.
Hmm.
And a really interesting fact, right? We're going to talk about a lot of things on this podcast, a lot in meditation and the mental component in manifesting and quantum physics and all of this. But what's really interesting to note is that most of this stuff couldn't be measured until around 2010. So a lot of the science that is coming out is very new
Hmm.
and it's challenging a lot of what we previously thought was true.
Right.
But it's also at the same time validating a lot of what ancient civilizations knew. So, a long winded way of saying the mind body connection is very real. In the medical field, it's referred to, or the scientific term would be psychosomatic, which generally is acknowledging that there's a physical symptom as a result of some sort of psychological or emotional factor. There's a lot of, it's kind of a blanket term because like
Hmm.
it can be used for a lot of things, um, but it's very real. And so we have two just kind of interesting studies I want to reference. One's not a study, one's an MD. So I'm going to butcher her name and I do apologize. Lakshmi Menezes, MD at Florida Medical Clinic. So she wrote an article talking about the mind body connection. And she explained that scientific studies, this is a quote from her article, scientific studies are constantly revealing that the hormones and neurotransmitters or chemical messengers associated with emotion can also have physical effects. They can affect our blood pressure, our heart rate, sleep patterns, appetite, and so much more. And so I think that kind of really starts this discussion, right? Of like the things you think affect a lot of like biological processes. And we talked last time about the monks in the mountains raising their
Hmm.
body temperature. So this is a very real phenomenon, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're all consciously controlling it.
Right.
And just because you're not controlling it doesn't make it not real.
Yeah. And I mean, just that right there, right? Saying that, like, it can affect our blood pressure, our heart rate. I mean, that's like that stress component that we
Yeah,
were talking about and the nervous system reaction. I mean, you think yourself into stress, into thinking you're in danger and that your body goes into survival mode.
that's the
And
physical response of your stress. You're triggering your fight or flight because of your thoughts.
right, and so your thoughts create all of these feelings that then actually affect your biological processes, like your blood pressure and heart rate do change because your nervous system was actually designed to run your body differently to get you to safety.
Mm,
It's running on adrenaline.
yeah. We've talked about this in the past is circumstances, right? From our CTFAR model. A circumstance is neutral.
Mhm.
They are all neutral. We assign the meaning with our thoughts and choose the path we're going down,
And we have, yeah, that's our perception. That's
right?
our really like that's our perception of life. And that's why there can be a circumstance and you and I can have completely different thoughts and feelings around it. And that's just based on how we grew up and the beliefs that we hold true today.
Yeah. So, another study we have here, a 2006 study published by the National Institute of Health. They concluded that there is no real division between mind and body because of networks of communication that exist between the brain and neurological, endocrine, and immune systems. So, traditionally, the mind and body have always been treated as two separate systems. That's pretty standard traditional medicine. If you have a mental health issue, you go to a psychologist, a therapist, whatever route you're taking, versus physical, you're generally going to a hospital.
Mhm.
But this study even actually acknowledged that all the way back to medieval times, the two were treated together and likely far before that. But I think that that point, it published in a medical journal, really illustrates like we have deviated very far from like traditional medicine. Now, what we call traditional medicine is just symptom management.
Mhm.
Whereas this holistic approach, where you're considering all these components together, that's about root cause resolution. Like what's actually going on with the human being, not just what are they experiencing.
Right. Like what thoughts are they living by and what effects is that having on their health and their body? I mean, you said right there that it affects your immune system. And again, that goes back to if you're living in fight or flight, in which how many of us are literally living our lives in chronic stress and your immune system is affected. It's
Hmm.
not as effective. So you could get sick easier.
Yes, scaring people and fear mongering will compromise your immune system. So, this study actually concluded that the mind plays a role in both disease and healing. So, something we'll get deeper into, in future episodes is that holistic cancer treatments, they often teach people to be much more positive. And what they found in studying this is that those patients typically have a much more beneficial outcome. They typically don't go back into remission and they have a much more favorable experience with treatment.
Well, that brings me to ask you about how the mind played a role in your healing.
Mm, yeah. Um, I think I talk a lot about identity in that conversation because I had to realize that nothing about me was who I wanted to be, So in the conversation of me healing, it was truly becoming a different person and actually taking inventory on my thoughts.
Yeah.
Like, I'm being mean to myself. Okay, well, why am I being mean? What is that true? Do I need to accept that? If it is true, which, does happen, how do I change that?
Mhm.
I felt very overweight and I'm very mean to myself at times. And I would just call myself fat. And so the discussion for me was number one, understanding that, you know, I mean, first of all, I was on medication that was like giving me the munchies. I distinctly remember one evening, 4 hours eating food on the couch, and the time went by, and I was like, "What on earth just happened?"
Food or chemicals?
Chemicals out of boxes. Um, so it really reached the point of I need to be nicer to myself, right? Understanding like you can feel like you want to change, but you don't get there by beating yourself up.
Mhm.
Like you have to accept the current state of affairs. And then once you've taken inventory and you've accepted that, it becomes about what actionable steps do I take to create the change I'm looking to create.
Mhm.
And for me, that was about consistency and what I was doing on a daily basis to become that better version of myself.
Yeah, and I think, the acceptance that
Mm,
it is on you.
yeah. You know, I went through a very intense suicide attempt that I was very fortunate to live through. And it was very easy for me for a very long time to blame people in my life, blame the programming I received, blame, the medication I was on, blame the advice I got. But at the end of the day, nobody's there in the hospital with you to deal with that for you. It had to reach a point where I understood the responsibility and the things I went through were entirely my own.
Right.
So,
And that kind of brings me back to, the CTFAR, like, the circumstances that you were going through, your thoughts created meanings around it and everything, and that's not to say that people aren't gonna have circumstances that are really difficult,
right.
and you're gonna go through hardships and have potentially negative feelings about that, and that's okay, and that's all part of being human, but recognizing that it is up to you to change that moving forward, and not having that as, like, a crutch.
Right.
Like,
Right.
those negative things that did happen to you or are happening, like, you can move forward differently, and you don't have to just place blame on those things because that doesn't have to be the driver of your future.
Yeah. And I think, I always treated it like the victim mentality of who am I blaming? Somebody's wronged me. And I reached a point of realizing like that does nothing, right? And we talked about this on our social media is like that has never and never will yield long-term success. However, you also have to realize the only thing you get out of playing the victim is this punishment of choosing to be the victim
Mhm.
versus choosing to be someone better and
Yeah.
working toward that and striving for that.
I think a lot of people fall into the victim mentality because they feel stuck and they do need help, and there's a big difference, though, between seeking sympathy
Mm.
from others and seeking empathy.
Mm. That's a, yeah.
Wanting people to feel bad for you for what you've been through versus wanting people to understand and wanting to know that other people have been through it, and being able to make those connections, and having that empathy and really that help to be like, yeah, I have been there and it was tough, but I've gotten through it and you can also get through it. And so those two, sympathy versus empathy, are really a big part of being conscious and aware and knowing what you're looking for and being able to move past that.
Yeah. I think a lot about our modern world. I think that's a really profound statement, right? Like people tend to get on social media and seek sympathy. And it's really interesting, right? Because this is a conversation for another time, but trauma often turns into a contest. Like people act like my trauma's worse.
Mm,
And so they seek sympathy on social media by trying to post like the worst things that have ever happened to them. And it is what it is. People have their own way of coping, but I think to your point, seeking sympathy doesn't get you far. Seeking empathy is connection with other people and intentionally telling them you understand and I'm here. Here's me and here's what I've been through, but also I understand your struggle too.
Yeah. I mean, as humans, we definitely desire connection.
Yeah. That's your
And
spiritual component.
right.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that people necessarily recognize that they are seeking sympathy and that that's not going to help them. Maybe it's going to help them in the moment to,
Well, it's dopamine.
right.
It's the hit, right? They've studied it. You get likes, you're getting hits of dopamine, and it is just like heroin.
Mm.
So
But then after that,
need another
you
post.
just fall.
Yeah.
And so again, like once you get the dopamine, you fall, you crash. And then where do you go from there?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're getting empathy and you're connecting with people and you're able to really express yourself and allow others the space to connect with you and express and share how they may have gone through something similar, that can actually drive change for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also will help you find people to support you on your journey. When I ran my blog, I think there were definitely times, I was immature. I was learning a lot about healing, but there were definitely times I was seeking sympathy and there were definitely times um, where I was seeking empathy. And I think, I distinctly remember there were people that would reach out to me mostly after, like, I would say after seeking empathy, just thanking me. Not trying to say like, hey, my trauma's worse, but actually just saying, thank you for sharing. It reminds me that I'm not alone.
Hmm.
And I think that was really all I wanted from the blog.
Yeah.
Okay. So anything else on the mind body connection?
I'm sure that there's definitely going to be more on this, but um, again, I just want to kind of throw out that activity of trying the CTFAR model, taking a piece of paper, writing down, see circumstance, thought, feeling, action, result, go through something that you've been through, and then write it in a different way where it could be more neutral. And try to start to become aware of the thoughts that are coming up for you if you're not happy with the way that you are acting and the results that you're getting in life. Where is that all starting? Where is that stemming from?
Yeah.
Because doing, you know, having it as like a journaling activity is going to start to really help you practice.
Yeah. And it'll also help you start to see what it means to conduct your mind and choose thoughts that yield a favorable outcome.
Thoughts that you want to have
Yeah.
and that you're intentional about.
Yeah. Okay. So we will close out with some questions. So we're going to kind of have a segment at the end here where we ask the audience kind of what sort of things do they want to hear um, and what questions they want to ask us. So sometimes they'll be fun, sometimes they will be a little more in depth. Um, do you want to start?
Sure. So the first question, just what is holistic living?
Well, watch the first episode. um, but I actually wanted this question in here because I wanted to mention the physical component. So we live in a world that is highly materialistic and obsessed with physical,
Mm.
obsessed with looks. And
Our physical human body.
right. And so the idea is that when you think about the physical, they're generally only looking at diet and exercise, right? And so in the conversation of mental, the understanding is generally just meditation. And so I think when we consider holistic, you need to understand the physical, yes, is nutrition and exercise and taking care of your body physically. But the conversation of holistic is that there's far more than that. There is the mental component, there is meditation and CTFAR and things that are essentially like exercise for your mind,
Mm.
taking care of your mind, um, flexing that muscle. And, we'll get into studies on meditation, but it yields very favorable physical results,
Right.
stress response, all kinds of things. So there's that. And then spirit, right? So holistic living, physical, mental, spiritual. Spirit can really mean whatever you want, but it's not about religion. It's really
Mm-mm.
just about your belonging, your community, and what you're doing, what you're passionate about, and um, investing your time. Time is a resource that you're allocating, and you want to feel good about how you're allocating it.
Yeah. How are you spending your day to day? And your spirit or your soul, like that makes us who we are. That's creating, that uniqueness in each person.
Yeah, and the the line is, "You're a soul with a body, not a body with a soul."
Yes. I love that.
I love that too. Next question: does holistic living mean that you eat perfectly?
You want me to answer this one?
Yeah, why don't you answer that?
Something that I learned very early on as I started this journey is that no, you're not going to be perfect. And not even in the eating component, right? You were just talking earlier in this episode about how you've been struggling mentally with the exercise component. Um, we really try to follow kind of a rule, like an 85-15 rule. 85% of the time, we're trying our best to eat as well as we can and really make sure we're nourishing our body, to be getting our exercise in, to be doing practices
Yeah,
that support our mind and support our spirit and our greater picture in life. And 85% of the time we are really trying to eat organic whole foods that are nutrient dense, that are actually supporting us. But 15% of the time it's okay. Like we're human, we're not meant to be perfect. We are not perfect as we're here trying to teach others. And
yeah.
there is a component of just living life.
I like ice cream, guys.
Me too. However, the better that we have eaten and treated ourselves and continued to fuel our bodies better, it might feel a little bit worse
Oh, yeah.
when we go off path a little bit. So sometimes I feel like when people say like everything in moderation or balance, that can get a little dangerous
Yeah.
and become like an excuse.
Oh, I'm only eating ice cream at night. I'm only having a couple scoops, or, yeah, it's finding the balance that works for you. I think 85-15 is a great um, starting point, right? Like, especially people, trying fad diets. Like, what you end up doing, look, listen, I have been down that road, and you do solid for like a week, and then you just snap, and you're eating junk and soda and ice cream, and like, guys, please don't drink soda. Um but yeah, it's, you have to allow yourself the wiggle room to create a sustainable change. And I
Right.
think that's what gets lost, is you're not going to have this perfect diet
Or
all the
this
time.
perfect exercise regimen or a perfect, you know, stress response and perfect reactions.
Yeah.
Um, but there is also a piece of that I think we've really done is like there are things that are just absolute no's for us.
Yeah.
We don't have soda.
We don't drink soda. We don't have dyes. We don't have artificial sweeteners. We really avoid chemical preservatives and um, heavily processed packaged foods. No high fructose corn syrup.
We don't If we are eating something processed, we get things that we can read the ingredients on.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think to this point, too, this is kind of a good time to mention, tying back into the mind body connection, is if you are someone who eats a lot of processed food, your gut biome is dysregulated. And your gut biome is responsible for what, 90-95% of your serotonin production.
Yeah.
So, translating that essentially means your self-talk is going to be real negative. Your food choices are working against your self-talk. And so that, as we know, those thoughts are going to take you down a path of horror feelings. So the food that you choose very heavily affects your mental chatter.
Mhm.
I don't think people understand that enough.
Right.
Like, I've been down that road. I've been 100 pounds heavier eating awful foods, and I've been much lighter eating really good, clean foods. And I can tell you without a doubt, they make monumental difference. You're choosing to fuel your body. And we actually just filmed some content for this today. The food you consume, I believe Dr. Mark Hyman uses
Mhm.
this line, is the food you consume is giving your cells instructions. And there is no unchanged state. You're either creating or preventing disease.
Right.
So it's all connected.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next question. Where does traditional medicine fit in? Do you want to answer that? You want me to
You
answer?
can go.
Okay. Um, so I think I can kind of very quickly illustrate this one. When my lung collapsed, I think, living a holistic lifestyle, people think I don't believe in medicine.
Mhm.
I do very much. We live in a time where we are so advanced in medicine that people live much longer because we have life saving medicine.
Right.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of medicine that isn't life saving. There's a lot of uh, quote unquote elective medicine,
Mm.
right? So when my lung collapsed, they have to put a tube in me, and that tube helps the pressure get out of my chest cavity so I don't have a heart attack. Um, and that allows my lung to reinflate.
Yeah.
The alternative to that doesn't exist.
Right.
Like, the only way out of that is like if we were, I don't know, 100 years ago, that probably wasn't a thing. I likely would have died.
Yeah.
So there's a time and a place for it. There are certainly things where traditional medicine is absolutely needed. It doesn't mean that holistic living doesn't believe in it or doesn't follow it. It's just that holistic medicine, naturopathic doctors, and this holistic approach considers root cause. It
Mhm.
considers what's going on with you. And that's work I've had to do on my own since then. Why did my lung collapse?
Right.
Are there, you know, blockages in my chakras? Which, if you're listening, your chakras are very real. They're just systems in your body. They hold energy. They're energy centers in your
Mhm.
body. And if they're blocked, you can have health issues. So for me, um, that medicine saved my life,
Right.
but it also meant, from a holistic approach, that there was far more to look into beyond the physical component after I received the treatment.
Right. You got that treatment, and then there was also the next component of you were being recommended surgery,
Yep.
but you knew your body will heal. Your cells will heal and regenerate and do what it needed to do for you, and there was a lot for you to look into the root cause, and you didn't. You elected not to have the surgery.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of a really interesting point, and that's kind of a huge discussion. But long story short, when this happens, um, everybody in the hospital starts telling you it's going to happen again. It's going to happen again. And nobody helps you just kind of focus on what you're dealing with now. They immediately start giving you this programming that you're going to be in this situation again, which I absolutely took on. It happened 3 times.
Well, you were in fear.
I was
And what
afraid.
happens
Yep.
when you're afraid? Your immune system.
Right. So the default treatment is that they essentially cut the soft tissue out of your lung. The part that tore, they cut it, and then they make your lung smaller. It's called a lung reduction surgery. So they staple it up, they staple it to your chest cavity. My dad's had it done. Um, I didn't want to do it. And I mean, I'm still dealing with the nerves that they cut, putting the tubes in my body. And, so that's kind of the default thing that they go to. But that's largely because they don't really understand them. The only thing they understand about collapsed lungs are that um, it generally happens to tall, skinny guys, and now they're seeing it more because COVID affects your pulmonary system.
Mhm.
So I think there's a time and a place for that kind of medicine. Um, with everything that I went through, I had a deeper understanding of healing, and I understood that most people who have this are not healing from it. Their tissue is not actually repairing because they're stuck in fight or flight.
Yeah.
So those cells don't ever get a chance to repair. So yes, it happens again. For me, I really started focusing on getting my body back into rest and digest, being able to reset my central nervous system. That led us down the path of getting our sauna and our ice bath and starting those practices. And it really is mostly mental at this point.
Yeah.
It's about not having that fear that it's going to happen again. And it pops up randomly throughout the day. But ultimately, I chose a path of more ancestral medicine. I started taking beef lung. Um, the same principle. I'm giving my body, my cells, the blueprint for what it needs to heal and repair and create a stronger lung.
Right.
So I dove in. I took beef lung. I took bone and marrow to get programmable stem cells. I took living collagen that would help actually give my body the type of collagen that's present in the lung. I did a lot. I really, I did. I took trachea, which actually is being tested now in cancer treatments because for whatever reason, trachea has profound healing benefits that is actually helping people quite a bit
Mhm.
recover from cancer.
Yeah.
Um, I want to mention while we're on the topic, cancer is always occurring. It
We always have cancerous cells in our
yes,
body. Yeah.
yeah, it's always occurring. There's a lot of misconceptions about it. Again, we're not doctors, but we understand this stuff pretty well. Um, Cancer is the result of your immune system not regulating, which this goes back to the conversation of stress.
Mhm.
You know, if your immune system isn't properly regulating, those cancer cells can replicate. So this just continues to illustrate why it's so important to get out of a state of chronic stress.
Yeah.
That was a very long tangent, but circling back, when my lung collapsed, um, that medicine was life saving medicine and it helped me and I agreed with it. As far as the holistic component, it was an understanding that that medicine I received was symptom management. My lung was not inflating.
Mhm.
Getting out and understanding the holistic side of it is what is the root cause? You know, my self talk, I wasn't meditating. There were so many things I was doing that I knew I should have been doing for my health. And we've talked about that. I really used that as an opportunity to understand I need to dive in and choose this and not have one foot in the mainstream and one foot in this kind of wishful hopeful thinking about spirituality.
Right.
So that's what I got.
Yeah. I think I can very quickly share something that I went through with traditional medicine was for 15 plus years I've been dealing with acne, and all I did was go to different dermatologists and get prescribed different medications and, you know, pills, topicals, all of the things. A lot of those pills created more issues within me in my gut. Antibiotics just
Liver.
wreaked havoc on, yeah, my gut, my liver. And years and years and years of that, none of it helped. None of
Yeah.
it. There wasn't a single thing that actually helped. And then, you know, a couple years ago, I started working with a naturopathic doctor who taught me that there was an emotional, mental side
Yeah.
of
Your
acne.
beliefs.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so,
I'm sorry to cut you off, but this is a great example because it's identity.
right,
You identified as someone with acne.
I think I still am consciously working through that even.
Yeah.
But that's a really big example of seeing it as something more than needing medication or needing some sort of intervention medically, and seeing it as what it is. Like, it is a symptom of some dysregulation in me, and it's not just in my body. Yes, there are components that is like my gut, but there's also the mental component, and it's all connected.
Yeah.
And that's how my body is choosing to show it.
Yeah. Are you willing to share about your thyroid as well? Because I think that's a really good example too.
Yeah. I in high school, I was 18 years old and I had been diagnosed with hyperthyroidism. So my thyroid was producing way too many thyroid hormones. It can have lots of symptoms. I actually had my thyroid was like sticking out, like I had like bumps in my throat that were like sticking out. And I did end up going, the traditional route. I took radioactive iodine and it treated it. I haven't had thyroid issues in over 10 years now, but I've learned a lot about, what could have caused that. I think there's a component that I recently learned that Epstein-Barr virus can cause thyroid issues, and I have that because I had mono when I was younger.
Yeah, they thought there was only one strand, and now it's looking like there's many, many, many strands.
And like there's different stages of it.
Yeah.
But I think the like mental emotional component of it really looks at your throat chakra.
Yeah.
And I saw that for myself as like a fear of speaking up, the inability to really express myself. For my whole life, I've been told, like, you're really shy, you're quiet. And I was always someone, kind of hiding in the corner.
Yeah. So it manifested itself as a physical symptom.
Yeah, I think there were many components to why that happened. And had I had that problem today, I would have definitely gone about it in a different way. There was the traditional medicine piece and it did what it had to do at the time. And I'm very grateful that I was told for years, you're going to have to be on medication for the rest of your life to manage this.
Yeah.
Somehow I didn't need it because that radioactive iodine that I did fixed it, and it didn't. I was told it was going to go the opposite way. It was going to go to hypo, which is more manageable, but that I was going to have to be on medication forever. And I continuously tested my thyroid and the levels were normal. So I never had to go back on medication. And I'm so grateful for that. But had I gone through that today, I definitely would have really taken a different approach and looked at other root causes of why that was happening.
Yeah. I one last little tidbit. I think all of this is really kind of illustrating really well the connection between mind and body. I don't know if you remember this. My jaw used to lock up.
I do remember.
My jaw would lock up randomly, and I would struggle to eat for like 2, 3 days, and it would click, and
I remember the
it was
clicking.
so painful. But interestingly enough, not so interestingly enough, that only happened when I ate processed foods, heavy in chemicals,
Mm,
drank lots of alcohol. There were a lot of like physical things that happened to me that, you know, in hindsight, I understand were about what I was fueling my body and my cells with.
yeah,
That's all I got.
that's all we got.
All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe. It helps us keep the channel going.
Leave us a review.
Reviews help. If you're interested in supporting us, there's a lot more ways you're going to be able to do that coming down the road. But for now, the easiest way is to check out our clothing line, New Moon Apparel. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in.